Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thanks for coming. We're going to wait just another minute or two. We had, I think, over 200 people sign up for the session. We've got about 56 on so far, so I'm thinking we'll give folks another minute or two and then we'll get started. And thanks, I see a lot of folks entering into the chat, their area of interest and focus. So if you haven't already entered elementary or secondary or both, please feel free to do that and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Thanks. Okay, it's 4:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Again, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I know we had a tremendous amount of interest in all these sessions, so I appreciate those of you who maybe couldn't get into the other sessions and came to this one, even if it wasn't your preference. We thank you for taking the time to be here. Based on the earlier presentations that I've done with staff and with parents earlier, we're aiming for about an hour and a half. We may go a little bit longer than that, but certainly want to welcome you to stay for as much time as you can over the course of that time. Looking at the chat, it looks like we may be a little more heavily interested in elementary, but I am seeing still a fair amount of secondary and both. So we will be sure to touch on really all areas. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of our building administrators with us for this session. They had a lot of scheduling conflicts, were not able to be with us. So we'll do our best to answer any building specific questions, but some of those may be, we may have to defer to the building principals who will be having their own meetings with parents as we approach the start of school. So I apologize in advance if there's some specifics at the building level we may not be able to address today. We'll do our best to field those questions. We are in the process of putting together student parent handbooks as well. We anticipate those going out around August 28th. That will have kind of general district information, but it will have the building specific details, times, locations, doors, procedures, etc. So hopefully what we are not able to answer for you today in that regard, you will be getting from your building principals. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out to them directly between now and then with any specific questions. But again, thank you for being here today. I want to start by thanking our Board of Education, who has continued to lead and govern through this crazy 6 months that we have had, very unprecedented and unpredictable times. And there's members of them with us today. And I thank them for their presence, for their support and their leadership and guidance as we have worked to develop these plans. I want to thank the administrative team who basically have given up their entire summer, working day in, day out, weekends, evenings to try to put this all together. There's only 24 hours in each day, and I think they probably did about 30 hours worth of work in those 24 hours each day, and there's still work yet to go. Meetings are continuing this week as we continue to nail down details about different pieces of the plan. And I'm sure even though we've thought about all the different areas that we needed to resolve between now and the start of school, we'll probably get there, and there's still be a few more to go. So I appreciate their dedication, their thorough professionalism, and attention to detail that has gotten us this far. I also want to thank the teachers that participated in our subgroups and oversight groups for their work throughout the summer to really bring the kind of the hands on the ground, the instructional perspective to the work that we're doing, so we could try to make this something that is manageable for them, so they have what they need to provide the education that we all want for our children. And thanks to the parents who also help to be a sounding board to us through the planning process. We met with a couple of our district standing committees, the Authentic Learning Committee, the Community Engagement Committee, PTA Council, ran a lot of these thoughts and ideas by them for their feedback as we work towards finalizing. So thank you to them for their participation. And thanks to all of you for being here today and for being interested and really coming to the source to try to get the information needed. And I thank you for your patience through the spring. And as we head into the fall, I think we're all recognizing that same pattern, at least we are internally. This has been a moving target since day one of this health crisis. And through this spring, you know, it was about everything was coming in 2-week cycles. Every 2 weeks, some new decision or announcement or step was in the process was given to us, and then we had to scramble to keep up with it. So even as we approach the beginning of school, you know, emotions are starting to heighten. There's a lot of, you know, media and social media is not helping any of us to have a clear picture of how to decide. It's a lot of information and pressures and concerns are being raised around us. And in the midst of that, we really have tried to remain flexible, to remain collaborative, and to remain focused on the job at hand. And that is, how do we best educate our children? How do we plan to bring them back to some level of normalcy to the greatest degree possible? So I know we've all had to be flexible. We've all had to collaborate and communicate, and I appreciate your partnership in that as parents. We are all coming to this with the best of intentions. We all want what is best for our children, even if we've got different opinions of what that might look like. That is the intent that we're all coming at this with, and that's one thing that I have always appreciated about the community of Pelham, is everyone is well intended in looking to do what is best and working together to accomplish that on the same team. So as we headed into the planning, I think it's important, you know, to know that a lot of what you're seeing here is actually reflective of a lot of lessons learned from the spring, reflective of feedback that we got from parents and from teachers about what worked, what didn't work, how we might tweak and adjust things as we planned for the fall, because we knew that it was going to be tricky, and we know that it is going to still be fluid. The big themes that we came out of the spring hearing from parents is that we needed more structure to the day. The beginning and ending wasn't enough for elementary, and for middle school and high school, the half day of classes wasn't enough. So more structure to the day, more instruction, period. So more instructional time, contact time with teachers. At the secondary in particular, having class each day and not having days that there was no instruction occurring. Those were some of the biggest themes that we walked away with. And then with regards to what a hybrid might look like, again, we recognize and heard from parents, there is no one plan that is going to work for all families. It's just a fact. We knew that in the spring. We know that heading into the fall. But again, the biggest themes that we heard from parents is, please, we recognize it's going to be hard, but give us a predictable schedule for our children, and try, if you can, to have our families on the same schedule. And especially thinking of those families who have young children and older children, who often at times help with care of the younger children. So those were two big pieces that went into our thinking as we approached deciding on a schedule and deciding on how we were going to navigate this hybrid model. So I just think it's important that you know that on the front end, because those do undergird the decisions as that we made throughout this process. So for the continuing on with the presentation, what I'm going to do is present my screen so that I can share the presentation. I'm going to try to move relatively quickly because we do have quite a bit to cover, especially since we want to cover both elementary and secondary. So I apologize for the speed at which we're going. I should say as well, thank you for submitting questions ahead of time. I reviewed the questions specific to this group who signed up for today's afternoon session. I'm going to try to hit a lot of the questions right within the presentation. At the end, I've got a list of those that we may not cover, directly in the presentation. So we'll go through some of those so you get some of those questions answered. And then if we have time, we may be able to take some questions from the chat as well. Appreciate everybody just tuning in and keeping mics on mute for audio quality and just for the sake of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to move on into the presentation for the day. So heading into into the start of school, the task that was laid before us, of course, was to design 3 different approaches to how we would reopen school. What would a full in-person return to school look like? What would we have to do to adjust given the health and health regulations given to us by the Department of Health, by the New York State Education Department? What would a full return look like? What would a full virtual learning remote model look like if we have to go that route? And then a hybrid, what would it look like to have elements of the two so that we have the opportunity to reduce density of the students that are coming into the school? So just to begin with, and I address this question right up front. Full in-person instruction. We did begin our planning looking at what would full in-person look like from a health and safety and logistics perspective. And we spent time looking at what would a full virtual environment look like, because those were the two most knowns. We know what in-person is like. We have normal bell schedules. We have normal lunch and recess specials, et cetera. We know the flow of the building. So what would we have to adjust in that case? And when it came to full in person, if we get to a point of being able to do full in person, that would be talking about bringing in the full enrollment of the schools, full attendance of all students at the same time. We would certainly, within this year, if we do get to that point in time, we likely are still looking at adjusted protocols for some of our large group settings, such as lunch, music ensembles, et cetera. We would be following a normal schedule if we were all in. We did put out a little over a week ago, I think it was, that at this point, we're taking the full in-person return to school off the table. Yes, I understand the metrics are low, and this is probably the lowest they're going to be. But the guidance as we have it now from both Department of Health and State Education Department is strongly recommending social distancing. And I think we're all very cognizant of the fact that our schools, while beautiful, they're 100 years old, which means small classrooms, small hallway spaces, small office spaces. So there's really no viable way to socially distance in our current schools. I should add, to most of you know as well, our enrollments have been growing in the district over the last few years. So our buildings are very full. So that again is prohibitive when it comes to trying to create a situation of social distancing. So as long as those recommendations are there, we've learned over the last 6 months as New Yorkers, social distancing and masks work. If we can't social distance, that is going to be prohibitive to us bringing students back to school. So as long as that remains a recommendation at this point, I don't foresee us moving in that direction until such time as whether there's a vaccine or the guidance changes as to the value of social distancing. So that really is the reason behind the decision. I know that was a big question once that email came out. That's really what it comes down to. Social distancing. We as educators are entrusted with the care of your children, and we do not want to take risks beyond what the science and what the guidelines are telling us are viable. So that answers that question to a degree. But us thinking through that full in-person definitely helped us to answer some of the questions that would be needed as we consider consider the hybrid, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. So we also, as I said, spent a lot of time talking about the full virtual learning plan. The plan that we're bringing to you today is significantly changed from the model used in the spring based on the experience that we had and the feedback provided from parents and teachers and students. We definitely paid more attention to increasing the instructional engagement time, direct contact with teachers, which we call synchronous learning. So teacher, student on the computer together doing work. And also a big area that we wanted to increase the accountability on the student. I think you all remember we took a do no harm approach in March and April, and as we wrapped up the school year, we were all really under the weight and really the trauma, for lack of a better word, of a public health crisis pandemic like nothing we'd ever experienced before. So there was a lot of emotional stress, a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety. And we did not want students to be negatively impacted academically as a result of that. So that's why we took kind of a more general approach, not a lot of academic or grade accountability. Now that we're heading into the new school year, their social emotional wellness will continue to remain a priority, but we do believe that we can find better ways to hold students accountable for their work and have a better flow of information from teacher to student, student to teacher to provide feedback, formative assessment, and summative assessment as well. So you will see more of that process. Our committees this week actually were meeting to finalize some of the details around tests, quizzes, benchmarking, assessments, report cards, et cetera. So we do anticipate somewhat of a more typical approach to that as we approach the year ahead. There will also be more accountability for student attendance. We're required to take student attendance daily. It's daily for elementary, period by period for secondary. So that's another piece of accountability that we're going to be expecting of our students. We're continuing to use a balance of synchronous and asynchronous, so the live time work paired with independent work that students will do separate from the class time. As I said, we're going to be maintaining a priority on social and emotional needs of students. We're going to have to be very attentive to that at the beginning of the school year in particular to establish relationships, especially since there will be at least a portion of the day on through virtual connections. But that will also be ongoing work throughout the year. And later on, Julia Chung will be sharing a little bit of the plans that we have for that. We also have to be sensitive to screen time for students. I know we've all sat on Zoom meets for 6 and 8 hours a day, and there is a point of diminishing returns, and there is research to back that up. So you're going to see in any of these models that have some element of screen time, there is attention to that through somewhat abbreviated schedules. So that's where some of that comes from as well. We also do recognize, and those of you in the education field know, that we also need to support the professional development and training needs of our teachers, not just once, not just at the beginning, but throughout. And again, each one of these settings has a different complication to it. So a full virtual environment will have one set of skills and tools that teachers are going to need. A hybrid is going to be slightly different. So we did need to account for that, but we did recognize from feedback from the spring that having, say, a Friday of no classes for the sole purpose of that training was not really the best approach moving forward. So we did build in time, which we'll talk about as we go through, because we do need to remain attentive to that for teachers to be effective with students throughout the setting. So again, we're focused on the full virtual model here right now. So this would be if we were 100% virtual. It could be for a short term, say there was a case and we had to close a school down or some classes down for 24 to 48 hours. It could be a scenario where students or teacher wind up quarantined that we would be on virtual. Could be a position where an entire school gets closed down, or theoretically it could be the district as well. And we'll talk a little bit more later about what may trigger those types of things. But this is really what it would look like at the elementary level. It's a 2-hour block of time in the morning. The white is actual instructional time. So just because it's empty doesn't mean it's nothing. That's actually a 9 to 11 instructional block in the morning with enrichment and intervention rotated throughout, as well as specials classes, live time interaction with the specials teachers rotated throughout on our normal 6-day cycle. They'll have an hour off for lunch, then again another 2-hour session in the afternoon, and the rotation of the specials. There again will be within this direct instruction by the teacher, and then time for students to work. So within those 2 blocks, it's not going to be 2 hours of a teacher just talking and students listening. It's a teacher delivering instruction, and then students breaking out to work independently on their work. A teacher may meet with small groups, may check in with individual students, may bring the class back like they normally would for clarification, for whole group instruction. It gives them 2 hours of time to work with in a more typical way than they normally would, the more typical way that they would in the classroom, albeit just virtually. Within that, given that it is somewhat of an abbreviated day, we've defined some at least minimums of what we would like to see teachers doing each day instructionally to make sure that we are progressing appropriately through the content. The priority is shifting a bit to reading, writing, and math. We are maintaining our morning meeting because we do, again, need that social emotional connection. That is key to making sure that the learning environment is established amongst the class, as well as making connections with each student. So that will be first thing in the morning, but then we will move into instruction. So at least 30 minutes, 30 of reading, 30 of writing, and 30 minutes of math daily. We are at the moment probably postponing a little bit of the start of science and social studies until we get routines established into the year, and that's whether we're hybrid or virtual. We want to make sure that we focus on those foundational skills, do assessments to see what gaps may have been created and resulted from the spring, and do what we can to fill in those gaps. So priority will be focused there. And then teachers will have the flexibility and fluidity to adapt for the needs of their class. And I think that's one important thing to say as well. In the fall, we used our district-wide templates because the goal was to provide some level of consistency for students district-wide. Now that we're going to planning for a more typical approach, even if it's virtual, we want to give teachers more autonomy. They're following the same curriculum and standards for the district, but having more autonomy to design lessons and teach the class the way they're using their professional judgment, their art and science of their own talents and skills as a teacher, and adapting to the needs of the students in their class. So some key details for you to know. We have, the district has purchased Chromebooks, enough Chromebooks for all third grade 3 through 5 students. Currently, those are going to be set up on carts in the classrooms. If we are in a hybrid model, students will have those in the classroom. If they need to bring them home, you need simply to reach out to the principal to let them know of your need. If we were to shift to full virtual, we would be giving those to students to take home. We just don't want them bringing them back and forth daily because of the wear and tear. Older students can manage that, where you don't want to put the younger students in that kind of daily back and forth scenario. But we do have those available for all 3rd through 5th graders already in the classroom. Any K through 2 students who do need a device at home, parents can request those, as we did in the spring as well. And thanks for those who filled out the survey. We did put out a survey last week to determine device needs, internet needs, as well as any students who had health issues that prevented them from coming to school. So if you didn't fill it out already, I believe that is still open. That survey will be open until Friday, or you can reach out directly to your principal with those needs so we can make sure those needs are met for you. We will be continuing to use Google Classroom and Google Meet for the live instruction. Google Classroom will be fully implemented the way it was designed to be implemented this year. Again, that's not using that template anymore, but using the interactivity of Google Classroom for providing assignments, students submitting assignments back, grading within the system, communication through the system. So it's going to be a more flexible, fluid, and interactive learning information or learning management system. So that will hopefully reduce the links and the printouts and all those other things. There will still be some of that, but it's not hopefully not going to be the same volume of work on the parent that it was before. And the teacher will be able to give assignments to students right there during the class through the system. So there won't be a pick and search and hunt and find for those resources. That. So again, within this approach, we recognize younger learners have different needs than older learners in the elementary level. So teachers will adapt appropriately, whether it's attention span, whether it's approach to the learning assignment. We likely would be sending materials and supplies home with students. So if they needed special writing paper or if there were math manipulatives, our teachers are working on assembling kits and lists of what are those supplies that students will need. Normally they would be using in the classroom, but what are those supplies that they would need at home, and putting together kits of those so that students can have those at home with them to fully engage in the learning environment. I think we've touched on most of the others. Oh, and the last piece, I think that is important too, because there is definitely concern about screen time and students sitting in, having to do this all virtually. So within those 2-hour blocks, definitely there will be attention given by the teachers to movement breaks, screen breaks, some of the assignments that students are given. We're hoping to incorporate assignments that allow the students to step away from the screen and go do the work in a different way and come back to it, so that it's not 4 hours of consistent straight screen time. And unfortunately, we don't have any of our elementary principals on it with us today, but there has been significant discussion around that during this during the subgroup work. So kindergarten, I will just highlight a couple pieces here. And again, this is something, if you want more detail on this, I would encourage you to reach out to your principals for more detail. Kindergarten, we're given that the students have really never been in the building. We did not have the opportunity to do the normal transitions and screening that we would have done in the spring. We are going to use the first 4 days of the student school year for orientation for our kindergartners. So teachers or principals will be reaching out to set up appointments for all students to come in individually with their parent in the first 4 days of school, to come meet their teacher, walk the building, see the classroom, do the screening protocols that we would have done if we had had them with us in the spring, and try to get them personally oriented, being that this is their first time in school. So there'll be special attention paid for them. I think that covers those pieces. And then, of course, for our special education students, and I'm going to actually toss to Julia Chung for just a moment to talk a little bit about how IEPs and student needs will be met in a virtual learning environment.
Hi, good afternoon. So at the K-5 level, if you, let me just go back to the schedule. So we have built into the remote schedule IE blocks, and IE blocks are where our students typically receive the resource room services or the speech language counseling. So those will be provided as they were recommended on the IEP. But again, when we're full virtual, we are going to do the best we can. And I think the law also, and the state also recognizes that we will do the best we can, and it will be all virtual. In terms of classes, again, the resource room, let me see, the special classes will meet as they typically have. And so it will be all virtual. And all of our meetings will be virtual. We're going to do our best to do the evaluations. I'm hoping that if we do have to go remote, that it'll be just for a short time so that there is a chance for us to come back in person so that we could do the testing. But that would be for the virtual setting for K-5.
Great. And I just realized, I think Dr. Thompson, our Director of Humanities, is on the call with us today. And I know she was actively involved with our elementary team as they were working through details of the plan. Dr. Thompson, was there anything that you might want to add to the discussion of kindergarten or benchmarking assessments or just instruction in general for the elementary folks? I guess maybe not for now. All right. My mistake on that. We'll come back to that if she is able to join us later. Moving to the secondary level. So for middle school and high school, this is the new virtual learning schedule that we're looking to implement in the fall. And again, you see different from the spring. This will be all 9 periods in the course of the day. They are abbreviated, again, with that attention to screen time. You will see each period starts on the half hour. So we did that to simplify the schedule for parents and students so they know anytime it's coming up on a half hour, it's going to be the start of something. We also built in 5 minutes in between classes so they can have a bio break, run and get a snack, bathroom, stretch, get away from the computer for a couple minutes, etc. We also built in there 2 break periods for those same reasons, to give a little bit of a longer break. Because as I said earlier, there is research on the diminishing returns of screen time. So we want to be attentive to that for our students. So each day, and again, following a normal 6-day cycle, students will have class, periods 1 through 9. And then there is an academy period at the end of the day as well, from 2:30 to 3. For students, it's open academy, students to log in and seek assistance from their teacher. If we're in full virtual learning model, and actually if we're in hybrid as well, there will be all the clubs and after school activities will be held virtually. At this point in time, we're not having any of those held in person. Athletics has also been postponed. The start of athletics has been postponed to September 21st by the New York State Athletic Association. So again, for the time being, everything will be held virtually. Some key details of this plan. Our 6th through 12th grade students do have district issued Chromebooks. The 7th through 12th students should already have them from last year. I believe we'll be rolling those out to 6th graders. I know we loaned many out last year, but we'll be giving those out to any students who are still in need so that all 6th through 12th grade students will have them. And if anyone has any technology needs specifically, please reach out to your principal or to John Sabalos, our Director of Technology. I'm looking through these to see if Oh, so one of the pieces I mentioned before, we talked about, this is the third bullet, we talked about adding accountability for students academically. We're also really looking to reinforce some expectations, some good learning expectations for students, whether they're virtual or hybrid. And those expectations are typical school expectations. Come to school, in this case, come to the computer, come to school on time, dressed appropriately, prepared to work. So at a desk, at a table, at a place where you can focus and do your work and engage with what's going on. We're also going to be requiring that students keep the cameras on. What we learned from the spring is as soon as the students shut those cameras off, they very often disengaged. And that was very challenging from the teacher's part to maintain the engagement and the back and forth necessary of engagement for a lesson. Often you don't even know if the student was still there. So there's an extension being added to Google Meet that will give us the background screen similar to what Zoom has, so that students can still maintain privacy of the home, but still adhere to the expectation that cameras will be on. So cameras will be on, code of conduct will apply, and principals will work with students and explain the parameters of that and how it applies in a virtual environment. As we said before, there's going to be synchronous work, so the live time sessions with the teacher, with the class. There will also be asynchronous work, so work to be done separately and apart from that to supplement the work. Since we do have abbreviated periods, we know that we need to balance that in synchronous time with asynchronous work. We do have a framework that we're finalizing that's kind of a guideline of how much asynchronous work students should be given for each class. So that it is somewhat age appropriate and academic level appropriate as well. So as students get older, they can handle a little bit more volume of that work. And if they're in different academic levels, be it Regents, be it Honors, AP, there again will be a corresponding appropriate level of work. So we're trying to make sure that we have some parameters around that so it doesn't become overwhelming. And again, as Julia said, with special education, like in the spring, we'll be adhering to the IEPs to the best degree possible through the virtual environment. As I mentioned, students will have the virtual academy, and clubs and all those pieces will be held virtually. So that, we believe, is a much more robust model than what you experienced in the spring. We think it is going to be much more effective for both students at the elementary and secondary level. We talked briefly about the full in-person model. So what we did is we took what were all those health and safety modifications that we knew we would need to make when we attempt in person, combined with the virtual discussions and approaches, and then tried to mesh them into a hybrid model. So when we approached this, again, we took into that feedback that I mentioned before about having more structured days, more direct instruction, classes meeting each day. Especially in this case, we took into account that predictability of the schedule and families being on same schedules. And that's what went into that last item, the feasibility for families and students. When we came to this model, we knew that there was going to be a variety of competing interests, and we needed to make decisions based on some key driving priorities. Because there were a variety of models, and I should say every district, and I should have said this at the beginning, there's about 700 school districts in the state. Each one of them has their own local conditions, their own local priorities, their own local constraints, and all of those things work together to drive the choices that districts make. So as much as we had regional conversations about let's try to stay in the same neighborhood of doing similar things, just by talking to neighbors, every district is doing something different. So there is no one right way to do this because so much of it is dependent upon the priority and the constraints of each specific district. And I'll give you an example. One of the clearest examples to my mind is some districts have all of their elementary students in one building. We have neighborhood schools, so our elementary students are spread across 4 buildings. So that gives us different constraints to work with as we're trying to come up with plans and models that will work for us versus what might work for a different district. Different staffing, so that has different implications for scheduling, for cleaning, for all the various pieces of how we make schools run. So all those things feed into those decisions. That's just the preface to say these are the criteria that we picked that led us to the model that we then selected. We had to pick something that best provided for health and safety of staff and students. And mainly that had to do with, can we clean? Can we have the proper spacing? can we move around the buildings in ways that give us a level of safety and adherence to the safety guidelines as provided by the Department of Health and the State of Education Department. How do we provide best for the social and emotional needs of students? One of the examples where that showed up in our decision making, you may remember the survey that we sent out probably about a month ago asking, for preference between an every other day model, an every other week model, an AM, PM model, or an elementary, younger students in, older students on virtual learning. Those were the 4 basic models that were being considered. But when we started to weigh those models against these criteria, that's where we saw big differences. So something like the every other week model really fell flat when you weighed it against the social emotional needs of students. Because if they're only seeing their peers and their teachers in person once every 10 days, it's incredibly problematic from a social and relational perspective. Health and safety, that's where the AMPM model broke down, because we don't have the staff to sanitize and clean the buildings in 1 hour of transition time during the day. So those weren't the only places, but those are just examples of why certain things maybe didn't make the cut. Certainly we needed something that would allow us to address developmental needs of students and provide continuity of instruction across the models, whether we're in person, virtual, or hybrid. Again, feasibility for families, which I mentioned. So in that, we did weigh out those choices and landed on this AB rotation plan. So it's where students are divided into cohorts alphabetically. Each cohort receives 2+ days of instruction per week. So cohort A will come on Mondays and Tuesdays. Cohort B will come on Thursdays and Friday, and then we'll alternate Wednesdays. One of the adaptations that we've made along the way, this is just recently, we just approved a new calendar at Monday night's board meeting. On that new school calendar, what it did is it added 2 superintendent's conference days to the beginning of school. So instead of just 2 days on September 2nd and 3rd, we'll now have 2 additional days on September 8th and 9th, which means the start of school is September 10th for students. So the reason for that was to build professional development, more training and professional development time in before we started the school year. Additionally, what we discovered as we contemplated and fleshed out the hybrid model, because we couldn't do as much of an abbreviated schedule to enable professional development during the day because of the logistics that we now have to deal with regards to arrival, dismissal, lunch, recess, passing of classes, etc., we now needed to build in additional different time for professional development. So in the new calendar that was approved, on any day that we are in school for 5 days of that week, all 5 days of the week, we will have an early release on Wednesday. Again, this is only when we're in the hybrid model, only on a week where there's 5 full days during that week of school. We will dismiss at noon on Wednesdays so that teachers can continue with that planning, training, and support as they try to carry out this most complex of the models. We did we were very fortunate on the front end. Our director of technology, John Sabalos, jumped right on the opportunity to procure document cameras that can double as web cameras for us so that we had the capacity to stream lessons from every classroom in the district. Many districts are still waiting for those cameras. We have them and they're installed and they're up and ready to go. It's a fully integrated camera that does audio and video, connects seamlessly to the Chromebooks, to Google Classroom, and to Google Meet. So it's going to be an incredible tool in helping students to access the classroom. In many of the hybrid models out there, students are in person on their cohorts days to be in person, and then they're doing asynchronous independent work on the opposite days. We wanted to add this live stream piece in there to supplement that, because one of the biggest pieces of feedback we heard from the spring, as well as the other ones I've already mentioned, was that often, especially the elementary, parents didn't know how to teach the lessons to students because they just didn't know the language of teachers' college writing workshop, or they didn't know the math, the approach to math. Singapore math was so different than they had learned. So we wanted to supplement that what would have been asynchronous work with a live stream from the teachers. The students can listen to the teacher providing instruction to the class. They can listen to the questions that were asked, and then they would have all the work accessible to them through Google Classroom to work on independently, having heard that lesson. Also recognizing, though, that may not be enough support for students or enough interactivity, which is why we added either an academy or an office hours period, depending which level you're at called different things, but basically the same concept at the end of each day so that students have a place to go to connect live time with their teacher to get extra help. This hybrid model, again, students are going to get the same learning materials and lessons as the teacher is launching it to their class. They can launch it to the class at home as well, so students can follow along and engage in the same learning materials as the in-person group. It allows us to reduce the density in the classrooms to better enable the social distancing that is strongly recommended. So at the elementary level, you're looking at about a pretty even 50-50 split. I think 24 is the largest of our classes at the elementary level, so probably looking at about 12 students at most in the regular class at any given point in time, smaller in many cases. At the secondary level, it does not break out as evenly, and that's just by nature of different course selections. So one student might have honors courses, another might have AP, one might be in orchestra, one might take an art elective. All those different choices have different implications for the schedules. So although we divided the secondary in half alphabetically, as they rotate from class to class, there is going to be variation between the number of students in the class. It could be a small number in one period, it could be a very large number in a different period. We're trying to relocate some of those larger classes to bigger classrooms or places like Alumni Hall or the auditorium so that we can get more space between students. It's important to note that we did our best to try to achieve social distancing, but in all transparency, there will not always be 6 feet between desks. It's just not possible given the size of our classrooms and the enrollments in our building. So again, we're at 50% capacity, but that will not always mean that there will be 6 feet, which is why we made two important decisions with that everybody on campus is required to wear a mask at all times, except for when they're eating and during a mask break and recess for middle school and elementary. But otherwise required to wear a mask. And then all students will be issued a personal portable barrier. It's a little trifold, clear plastic trifold, similar to like a science research board that they will carry around with them, set it up on the desk when they sit down. So now they've got not only the mask, but they've got a barrier as a kind of a belt and suspenders safety protection. And also there will be times where students do have to take their masks off for eating, for example. That barrier will be their one safety precaution and protective piece at those times. So that's some of the details I think that will help to understand a little bit about the hybrid model as a whole. So moving quickly into the schedules, this is the draft of the elementary schedule. So you're going to see it somewhere between the full schedule and the virtual schedule. It's a little bit longer than the virtual schedule. It still has similar instructional period of 2 hours, a 2-hour block of instruction in the morning, 2 hour in the afternoon. But we did have to allow time for phased in arrival in the morning and then a phased in dismissal in the afternoon. We did provide a little bit of virtual office hours in the morning in case students need to check in with their teacher before school starts, and then a longer period of time at the end of the day. And again, thinking about those students who are home doing remote learning on those days, we wanted to every day to have an opportunity for students to check in with their teacher for help with their learning. We still have, again, an hour in the middle of the day for lunch as well. There will be specific details about exact arrival times and doors and all those things from your building principals as school gets closer. And one other piece I forgot to note on the schedule, the classes are each class period at the, I'm sorry, we didn't get to secondary yet. I'll save that when we get there. So I think I've hit many of these highlights. Let me just skim them quickly. Unfortunately, given this is at elementary, the constraints around social distancing, room size, chorus, band, and orchestra are going to present a challenge. For band and chorus, we would need to maintain 12-foot social distancing. We do not have the space to accommodate that. So at this point in time, we are suspending chorus, band, and orchestra for the start of the school year. We will continue to have band and orchestra lessons in small groups. So we are going to continue with music instruction in that way. But for the time being, we're going to have to be suspending those and hope to bring those back at some point. And certainly I know our teachers did a great job of some online performances. So we are expecting to see some of that work continue this year as well. We are trying to prioritize daily instruction for special class students. on ENL students. And in a moment, I'm going to come back to Julia to speak to a little bit to that. We already talked about. Actually, Julia, if you would go ahead and speak to that now about the special class and the focus that we'll be putting for
Sure.
elementary, please.
Right. So one of the things that we were asked to do is really prioritize the needs of the high needs students. And so when we're talking about high needs students, we're talking about the ENL students, which are English language learners, and also students with disabilities. When you're looking at a student with a disability, it could range. The services that a student requires can be a lot to very little, depending on the level and the needs of that student. And so in order for us to make this work for all students, because if we had every single student with disabilities in class every single day, that would not leave much room for the general education students, which would be very difficult and challenging. So we started with the students with the most amount of high needs. And so those are the students that might be alternately assessed, that may have cognitive disabilities. Those students are coming in every single day. The next group of students that receive that intense services would be the students in special classes. And so we have decided to have the special classes students come in every single day so that they can receive the special services that they require. In terms of the schedule, when you look at the schedule, there are actually times, again, similar to the remote schedule, there are IE blocks where the students will be receiving resource room. Those resource room services in a hybrid schedule the teacher will be actually working with all students. It wouldn't just be streaming. So we're making sure that the student has a contact with the teacher every single day. And similarly with the related services, because it is a very small group instruction, the teacher will be working with all students, whether they're in front of them or they are remote. We may also be utilizing the 8:45 to 9:15 slot for some of the services because we do want to make sure that the students that we are following the IEP recommendations to the extent possible. So we're going to be creative in doing our schedule and try to do our best to meet the recommendations of every single IEP to the extent possible.
Thank you. So many of the other items on here are similar to what you saw in the virtual learning as far as supply kits that would be home and the transition in for kindergarten. One thing that I would point out, the last two bullets there I think are important, that this approach does require all remote students to attend learning sessions daily. We will be taking attendance. As I may have said it earlier, we are required to account for student attendance. So whether they're in person or whether they're virtual, we will be taking attendance daily and following up on that. And then unfortunately, similar to chorus and band, there's another few other items that we're not going to be able to do in the current setting. And that is things like in-person field trips, town halls, assemblies, and PTA enrichment. For the time being, again, there's either large setting or mixing of cohorts that is just not something that we can do at this point in time. We certainly encourage teachers to do virtual field trips and to look for other creative ways that they can fill those gaps in the student experience. Thinking specifically now a little bit more carefully about health and safety specific details. Throughout the summer, our custodial staff has been implementing CDC cleaning guidelines, putting all the protocols in place for that. We've got electrostatic sprayers on order, which will electronically charge the disinfectant and help it to adhere to surfaces more effectively. A lot of attention is being and will continue to be paid to cleaning of high-touch surfaces on a regular basis. There will be hand sanitizer by all entrances and offices and in all classrooms. We can't have it everywhere in the halls because of fire codes and the need to supervise, but we will put it everywhere that we possibly can. Teachers will, especially at the younger grades, be instructing students on hand hygiene, washing routines built into the school day to help make sure that the students are doing that regularly. So we'll definitely be encouraging them to do that, and there will be wipes available as well in all classrooms. As I mentioned earlier, all students required to wear masks. There will be mask breaks provided by teachers and or a little bit more organically as students need, especially the older students are able to express their needs and make sure that those needs get met. Our We will be providing PPE of whatever is needed to all staff. We will also have masks available for students if they come to school and don't have them. We will be strongly enforcing the mask requirement. If a student comes to school without a mask, they'll be provided one and directed to wear it. And if they refuse, then they will be sent home. And our administrators will be involved there. If somebody has a medical reason why they can't, that's a different situation. And that we will work out on a case-by-case basis. And those students will need to maintain 6 feet from all people at all times while on campus. We've talked about the barriers. We've done a lot of, we keep joking that it looks like a bank now around in many of our offices, the administrative offices as well as teachers' offices. A lot of plexiglass dividers have been added around to different spaces, and we're continuing to add those as we identify new close areas or small areas. Touch-free, at least one touch-free faucet has been added to each bathroom, as well as paper towel dispensers instead of the air blowers. So we don't want to spread the virus around that way. So hopefully the bathrooms are less high touch than they were in the past. Drinking fountains in the high school have been capped off, and the bottle fillers are still available. The elementary, we've got the middle school, we've got disposable cups available to reduce the potential of mouth contact with the faucets. Elementaries, I believe we have bottle fillers there as well. So we're strongly urging students to continue to bring their own personal reusable bottles into school so they can access water throughout the day. As far as HVAC, we're definitely encouraging folks to have their windows open at all times. Yes, it's not an efficient system, but as far as AC, we're air conditioning and sending it outside, but better to have the open windows and fresh air. We're also in the process of getting an HVAC analysis from our district architect, and their HVAC engineers are in the process of evaluating, and they'll be giving us recommendations to be implemented prior to the start of school. And I'm going to ask Jim Rickey to talk about that and tents in just a moment. We are in the process of getting tents set up that we're hoping to use to expand lunch, recess, physical education, mask break areas, and anytime a teacher may want to move their class outside. We're going to have tents at all schools. There'll be 2 at each of the elementaries and probably 12 at the middle school and high school total. So 2 of those are likely dedicated for faculty, but the remaining 10 for students and for flexible use to be coordinated by the building principals. Students will see signage and 6-foot markings throughout the buildings to help remind them of all the protocols and procedures. And of course, our hall monitors are going to be encouraging them to do that as well. And we'll be training students and staff at the beginning of school on those health and safety protocols. Jim, was there anything you wanted to add as far as the HVAC analysis and tents?
Thank you, Dr. Champ. Really, you caught it all. We're having those licensed engineers coming through and doing a full assessment for our ventilation. We know they're walking through the district this week, and we hope to have that information as soon as possible. With the tents, we've also worked with our architect on a site plan and submission to New York State Education Department, Facilities Department, because we have to make sure we receive clearance to have those tents erected. And as we look at that and the tents at the elementary schools, we'll also be looking at temporary fencing for areas that are not enclosed with fencing. So we want to also think about the safety and security of our students and staff while they use those outdoor spaces. High school, middle school areas, we're looking more so inside the areas at Franklin Field and Ingalls Field in those areas. So those are already fenced. We look to be able to use those tents for places for mask breaks. You can use that for eating lunch, outdoor spaces, or for some short-term flexible spacing as well.
Thanks, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
And I should add the sanitizing will be occurring on a daily basis. Jim, could you speak for just a moment about those electrostatic sprayers as well? I think that's
yes, thank you. And we do have an update. So they're no longer on order. They've been received, which is good news. And really what they do is we first have to clean surfaces. So we're not just going to be using these sprayers. The first thing we need to do is to clean areas. And then once those areas have been cleaned, what we want to do is use these electrostatic sprayers, which put a positive charge on the disinfectant to help it more efficiently stick to the surfaces that we're spraying them on. So We have them in every school, so every elementary school, middle school, high school, and our plan is to use them daily as part of our daily cleaning process and disinfectant process. We'll also be able to use them during the daytime if needed, when we look at certain high touch areas, door handles, certain areas on water fountains, railings by the stairs, those types of areas too. We're certainly going to be looking to do regular sanitation as the day goes on.
And could you just add one more piece, because I don't know that I have it on a bullet. Could you talk about the BioShield that we're going to be using at the
Thank you.
High School?
Yes, there's a product which we're trying to find. It's one of the brand names is a BioShield. I think we're buying a product which is very similar to that, just a different brand name. We have ordered it. What it is, it's an antimicrobial product which makes the surfaces resistant for up to 90 days. So what we want to do is, obviously, we're going to put that on those desk surfaces and those touch surfaces as close to the beginning of the school year as possible, and reapply it as needed. Again, it said it has a 90-day life. I would expect us to not push it to the full 90-day life, but we'll certainly, we're working to have it. In most instances, as we're hearing, and I'm sure everyone knows, everybody's looking for these supplies, so we're all reaching for them. And again, we're working diligently with all of our suppliers to get them. So the electrostatic sprayers, those things have come in. Our sanitizers are in. We're working on the BioShield product right now. And then we also have coverings for our desks as well. I know you're going to be talking about that later as well. So kind of a belt and suspenders approach.
Yes. So just a couple other items, not necessarily in a particular order, but please know that we are expecting all students to adhere to the travel quarantine guidelines. So school starts September 10th. So please, as you're planning the end of your summer, please be cognizant of that. Students will not be permitted to come in unless they've completed that 14-day quarantine. You know, if a student is quarantined for any reason by the Department of Health or other municipal body, or if your doctor requires or recommends that they quarantine, that will not be, they won't be penalized for attendance. They'll have to just log in full virtual. But please know that we will be enforcing that. Each of the buildings, and again, the details and specifics of this will be coming from your building principals. We're looking at having staggered arrival and dismissal times so that we don't have large gatherings of students, adjusting where they're going to wait, how they're going to enter and exit the buildings. This third bullet is something that we need all parents help with every day. And this is something that, again, there's lots of concern in the community about this, because we need to be able to trust one another, to be honest on this. All students are required to have their temperature taken and to attest to not having COVID symptoms, or whether or not they have COVID symptoms, every day before they come to school. So we are in the process of reviewing a number of different apps to use potentially with our secondary students that might help facilitate that process. For elementary, we're probably just using a good old-fashioned paper process, and may use that for secondary as well, depending on the apps, if we like them or not. But basically, every student, we're asking, all parents have to take the students' attendance at home, and actually the guidelines that were given to us do encourage that to be done at home prior to coming to school. It's not feasible for us to manage that and actually get to teaching in the given day and not have kids gathering and have kids, you know, creating a backlog of entry into the building if we're trying to screen. So all parents are asked to do that. Our district doctor actually has said that taking a child's temperature at bedtime, within 24 hours of coming to school, but at bedtime is actually the most accurate. So all parents are going to be asked to do that every day before students come in, to bring in an attestation, whether an app or paper, that their child does not have a fever and is not displaying various symptoms of COVID. If they come to school without that, they will be redirected to a different entrance where somebody will discreetly be there to take their temperature and ask them those questions. So we're asking for your help in that, and I urge and beg you, please, and I know it's a huge imposition, especially on folks that are trying to get back to work or have health child care issues. If your child is sick, do not send them to school. Even if you don't think it's COVID, it is best to not send them to school. Please don't give them a Tylenol if they have a fever and send them on their way, because you're not only putting them at risk, you're putting everyone at risk. So we're going to need, as a community, as a school community, to commit to that, as difficult as that will be. But that's how we will all keep each other safe and be able to have any hope of keeping in-person instruction on the forefront of our focus. At the elementary level, students will remain in their classrooms for all their regular instruction. For specials, the specials teachers will come to them, and they'll be eating in the classroom for lunch. And that is to minimize contact with other students, minimize the touch on different places that they travel within the building, minimize the interactions with other adults as well. So specials teachers will bring everything they need to the classroom. If they're bringing shared supplies, there will be a process in place to sanitize them in between. Each student will have their own desk, their own barrier, their mask, and their own space. We're not using lockers or cubbies or anything like that. So students will have to maintain all of their belongings with them at their desk and their chair. So please keep that in mind, that we keep those as minimal as possible. And as I said earlier, students will have their own supplies for the classroom to the greatest degree possible. Physical education will be held outside whenever possible, whenever weather permitting. And if weather is bad, they will be back in the classroom for that. And our new director of athletics and physical education is working with our teachers to plan for appropriate activities there. The principals are going to work with teachers to put bathroom protocols in place so that we can promote social distancing and make sure we don't have too many students in there at once. And there was barriers or dividers being added in certain places if bathrooms are small or needs more division. Since students are going to be eating in the classroom at the elementary level, there's another big ask, and I know it's an imposition, but given the dangers around it, we are going to ask that all of our elementary schools are nut-free for the school year for all students in all classes. Nuts seem to be the one allergen that is most likely to be airborne. Since we're going to be in classrooms and we're largely going to be relying on volunteers and monitors in those classrooms, we want to make sure that the lunch in the classrooms is as safe as possible. So no nut products will be allowed in the elementary schools for the duration of this year. And we will be having boxed lunches will be available for purchase from the school food service program, and those will be brought to the classrooms. So again, processes are in place for that. We will still be having recess. During recess, students again will be grouped into their same class in pods, if you want to call them that. They will be allowed to take their masks off, which if your children are in rec programs now and they're doing outside play, that is allowed. So we're using those same guidelines and parameters. We will have hand sanitizer out there. We encourage students to they'll have to stay in their group to be spaced as much as possible, use hand sanitizer as much as possible. Playground equipment will be able to be used. It will not be sanitized in between because the guidelines tell us that is just an ineffective approach. So hand sanitizing and hand washing are the best defense in that situation. So there will be protocols put in place for hand washing before and after lunch, after recess, et cetera, and hand sanitizer available at all times. We will continue to do our safety drills. We're required to do that by state education department. They will look different this year though. Fire drills, they will all be announced and we will still conduct them, but we will have to do them in a socially distanced manner. So our security staff and principals will work with teachers to plan that out. So students will still evacuate throughout the year for those. With regard to lockdown drills, we are not putting students in the corner, in the bathroom, in the coat room, in those small spaces. We absolutely are not doing that. We will have students stay at their desk and we will instruct them on the procedures should a real event occur. So in a lot of ways, I think this actually may be good all around because as many parents know with elementary students, was somewhat anxiety provoking. So we'll be doing it instructionally. We will not be actually running through the paces of the drills for this year. And then finally, speaking of protocols, we certainly will have protocols in place in our nurse's office. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. And Julia, I think will help to supplement some of what I share here. So what happens if a student or a staff member becomes sick or gets a notice of being a confirmed COVID case while at school? They will be immediately sent to the nurse's office, and or if any student presents as sick during the school day or any staff member presents as sick, they're immediately sent to the nurse's office. If they have COVID type symptoms, they will immediately be isolated. So we've identified separate isolation rooms separate from the regular nurse's office. So if a student, needs a Band-Aid or, twist their ankle, the normal kinds of things you go to the nurse's office for, there will be a place for them separate from those who are displaying COVID symptoms. Parent will be contacted, student will be sent home and required to go for testing and positive and likely quarantine depending on the scenario. Julia Chung is our COVID coordinator for the district, so she is our direct contact with the Department of Health. So in any situation where it is confirmed or suspected, she will immediately be in touch with the Department of Health, and then we'll coordinate with them from that point on for next steps and procedures. Contact tracing will be initiated. That's going to be the backbone of our response because it has so many implications for so many other decisions. So that will work in partnership with the Department of Health. They do the contact tracing, but we help to provide information, contact information, birth dates, schedules, class lists, those sorts of things, so they can start to work through who may have been a close contact versus a proximate contact, and close contacts being those that then would likely have to quarantine. So those who are then ordered to quarantine would immediately shift to remote learning. So if a student becomes, we find a student is confirmed to be have COVID or is a suspected COVID case, they'd be sent to the nurse, sent home for testing, Department of Health. We would likely then be quarantining that class. So that teacher and the students in that class would be notified that beginning the next day, for the next at least 24 to 48 hours, they would be shifting to a remote learning schedule. Depending on then where that contact tracing led, it could be one class, it could be an area of the building, it could be an entire school. If it's a shared staff member that becomes sick and that shared staff member may have been across 2 different buildings, or if it's a student, a family has the illness within the family and they have siblings across multiple buildings, that may then trigger additional quarantines or additional closures in additional buildings. So you can see as it starts to play out, the tentacles that it will likely grow. And again, we're going to work with Westchester County on that. We will be providing resources to families of where they can get tested. We as a district don't have the capacity to test. The Department of Health in Westchester County does not have the capacity to test. But we are fortunate to have testing sites like Glen Island right in our backyard, and a variety of other places where testing is available. So they will guide the contact tracing. We will provide resources. They will provide resources as to where testing can occur. And then we would shift the respective people into quarantine for at least 24 to 48 hours. From our experience this summer and from speaking with colleagues, the guidelines recommend that you let the area that infected person was rest for 24 hours and then clean. And our experience with the contact tracing is it generally does take longer than 24 hours. So I would anticipate we're likely looking at a 24 to 48 hours initial closure for those processes to play out. It could then be a longer term closure for that affected group, depending on what the Department of Health determines and if there is a confirmed case and how close those contacts were. So we will notify those. We'll work with the Department of Health. They do their own notifications. We will do some notifications based on their guidance. It's a frustrating detail, but an important detail to understand. We must protect the confidentiality of the confirmed positive person. We cannot release that. We may be able to say that a staff member or a student in your child's class, but we cannot say who that child or staff member was. And just to go back to the bullet before that, the scope and the length of the closures is going to depend on the scope of the contacts and the scope of the quarantines. And I go back to that because I want to highlight the fact that many people keep asking for what are the metrics for closing the district or closing a school. And to be honest, we have nothing other than the metrics that have been given by the governor's office. The reality of when a school or a district may close or open is really largely anchored in the cascading effects of quarantine, contact tracing, quarantines, and closures. Because it's very realistic that we could get to the point where there's so many staff members quarantined, we may not effectively be able to run a school. And again, if it spans multiple schools because of sibling contact or staff contact, we then again may be in a position where we're forced to move to virtual, not because of an outbreak, but because of quarantines that change our ability to safely run the schools. So I think that that's an important point. We are such a small community. The infection rates may not necessarily be an accurate measure because we're so small. The sample size is really not an effective measure, but it's really more the logistics of the situation that are going to determine our ability to remain open. Julie, was there anything on that you wanted to add before I move into the secondary schedules?
Yes, actually, I did want to just, assure the parents that over the summer, we did have a couple of cases. And so we were in very close contact with Department of Health. And I actually have their cell phone number and they have my cell phone number. And there was a case that came up on a Sunday and I was able to reach somebody Sunday afternoon. And we went into the contact tracing, gathering information right away. And what they'll do is if they're not able to, if it's on a weekend and if they're not able to notify certain people, they'll ask me to do that. And I obviously have everyone's information. So I will be very much a part of that contact tracing. I did want to address a couple of questions that are in the chat box about temperature taking. The reason why we don't want to take the temperature of every single student in the classroom by the teacher is because we really want to make sure that we are having the parents tell us that they have taken the temperature and the temperature is not over 100. But it's not just about the temperature because we have to talk about all the different symptoms. And also we need the parents to assure us that they have not been in contact with somebody who tested positive in the last 14 days. So there are many different things that the parents have to kind of assure us before sending their child to school. So it's not just about the temperature taking. The other part is even if we try to take the temperature, we have 900 students coming into middle and high school, and it will take us a very long time to take the temperature of every student. And so I just want to, mention that this is something that I think the entire community, this is about the safety and health of the entire community that includes students, parents, but also us as well as staff, and also our staff's family. This is not just about Pelham, but this is about a greater, this is what's best for a larger community. And so we do hope that we are on an honor system. I know somebody else also mentioned, does that mean that everybody's on the honor system? Yes. You trust us with your kids. We trust you to do your part, take the temperature and tell us if there are symptoms, and please keep your child at home. There was a parent that mentioned that their child has seasonal allergies. What I would suggest is when you know that your child has allergies, please go visit the doctor and get us a note. What you might want to also do is maybe just be careful and just go and maybe have the child take the COVID test just to show that the child does not test positive. So I think there are things that you could do to help us, and we really are hoping to partner with you because this is, again, for the safety and well-being of everybody, of the entire community.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate you catching those questions in the chat too. Okay, so now we move to secondary. And this is the hybrid schedule that is now proposed for secondary. It's somewhere in between the regular schedule and the virtual abbreviated schedule. And in this one, school starts pretty close to normal time with first period starting at 8:20. The classes are 35 minutes in length with 5 minutes passing time. And school does dismiss earlier, dismisses at 2:15, which is actually aligned to the end of the elementary school day. So in case there's brothers and sisters at the secondary schools that need to go pick up younger brothers and sisters, they'll be getting out at the same time. And then you see we have a virtual academy period built into the end of the day as well. So a lot of the reasons behind this had to do with logistics. As Julia said, getting students in already, even without temperature taking. We're going to have staggered arrivals, staggered dismissals, so we need a little bit of time there in the morning. We need some time in the afternoon. We did allow 5 minutes between classes because we're going to be staggering the passing of classes. Principals are working out protocols. It might be all the odd numbered rooms move first, or the even numbers, something like that, so that we reduce the density in the hallways. We wanted to make sure that those students who are home for the day, those who are doing the virtual learning from home, since there won't be that much opportunity to interact during the day, that they had an opportunity to connect with the teacher each day, every day. So that's why we built in a virtual academy period at the end of the day, thinking specifically of those students. We actually are not going to have an in-person virtual academy. And the reason for that is really twofold. Since the classes are theoretically reduced size, so 50% capacity, give or take, the classes are smaller. Students should better be able to have their needs met in class by the teacher while they're there. They should get their questions answered more directly and hopefully not need that additional outside of class support to the degree that they did in the past. The other reason is really that we didn't want to add yet another time where students are mixing with potentially a different group of students. Yes, we recognize as they go from class to class, they're going to be mixing. Ideally, they're moving. If I didn't say it before, I'll say it now. We'll not be permitting use of lockers. So students should not be stopping and staying in places. They should be basically moving from class to class. So movement is going to help us on the health and safety factor. They are going to be obviously in their different classes for the course of the day, but we didn't want to then introduce yet another mixing of students at the end of the day. Could be students from different grades, students who hadn't already crossed paths again. So at the end of the day at 2:15, all students will be dismissed off campus at that point in time. Virtual academy will be held for those on remote learning, and then all clubs and after school activities will be held virtually as well, even if we're in a hybrid model. And again, as I said earlier, sports have been postponed. The start of sports has been postponed to September 21st. And then afternoons will continue to be used for teacher meetings as they normally are and additional training. So a lot of this is going to be repetitive. I'll try to highlight the pieces that may be different for secondary. Julia, would you want just to speak again about our Foundations of Learning program and how those students are being prioritized?
So Foundations of Learning program is our students that have the greatest level, the most amount of disabilities that are developmental and cognitive. And so those students do require to come in every day, and we are having them come in every day instead of being part of a cohort. The other part of it is those classes that the students are in, the special classes, actually have a smaller teacher-student ratio to start. So we actually don't have to worry as much about the social distancing for those students, and so they will be in every day. Elementary, earlier I mentioned that the other special class students will be in every day. Unfortunately, for secondary, that would be impossible for us because in certain classes, we may have 6, 7, 8 students with IEPs. And if that's the case, if you have a class of 26 students and you had 8 students in already, or even 10 students in already every single day, then it will be impossible for us to have the rest of the students in. And so what we did for the special education students, for special class students in the secondary, is that we have them in one cohort so that they are actually with the teacher in person or all together remote, so that they can be on Google Meet together, so that it is not a split between some in person and some who are remote. So those are some of the changes that we're making in cohorting for students. Dr. Champ mentioned earlier about the alphabetical cohorting, and depending on your child, if you have a student who has an IEP who's in a special class, and you have another student who's in the secondary schools, you may end up being in 2 different cohorts, only because we are trying to, as much as we're prioritizing the families, the next level of priority for us is making sure that we're meeting the needs of individual students, especially the students with disabilities. And so we're putting them in that cohort where they can be all together. So a handful of parents, possibly families, may have a split cohort, but majority of the families should have the same cohort, depending on the number of siblings there are in the family.
Great. I think most of the rest of these items we've touched on in some way already. So I'm going to move ahead. And again, this is going to be very similar as well as far as the health and safety protocols, very similar to what we're doing in the elementary. I did want to add, because it's not on the slide, maybe on the next one. Jim mentioned earlier about that we're going to be looking for a BioShield type product to be using on desks and chairs. It is not feasible to clean the desks in between classes. So it's kind of an old school approach, but a lot of schools are using this. They're using the BioShield as the base preventative measure, but then putting in a protocol in place as students walk in the room, they pick up just a big piece of like construction paper or butcher paper, some sort of big piece of paper, grab it on the way in, put it on the desk like a desk blotter as an additional barrier between themselves and the desk, so that they walk in, grab that, they put their screen barrier up, so they've got kind of a safety encapsulated area for them to do their work, and then they throw the paper out on the way out the door. It's old school and simple, but we believe it'll work effectively. Also, we will have wipes in the room, so should students choose that as an alternative, it will be available to them. I think we've covered all those pieces as well. And getting into here again, we've got some similar pieces in here. Yes, here's where we had the desk blotters for different cohorts as they move in and out. We've mentioned no use of lockers. Band, chorus, and orchestra are going to be modified at the middle school and high school. At the middle school level, they are, since it is a scheduled class during the day, they will still meet as a class, but band, chorus are not going to be, and the performing ensembles are not going to be able to practice the way they normally would. So they're going to shift the curriculum to be a little bit more of a focus on music theory, history, those type of things, so that they can still maintain the class, but not conduct the activities that will put people at risk. Lessons and sectionals and small group work will still continue to occur. At the high school level, it's before school, 0 period. So their administration is working with the music teachers there to determine how to approach that. If it would be more, again, small group and sectionals, since it's 0 period, and maybe only those students who are assigned to a given day would come, to reduce the density and number of students there. We do expect, though, that we will have some of those virtual concerts like we had in the spring, where students will be working towards a culminating experience. It just may not be the typical one that they're accustomed to. Again, phys ed will be held outside whenever possible weather-wise. We have the tents as a backup plan for that if it's somewhat inclement. A change that hopefully students will appreciate, we're going to be using a sneakers-only approach to phys ed, meaning they don't have to change clothes. So we're not going to be using the locker rooms other than for bathrooms. Students should just dress appropriately on those days so that they can participate in physical education just with sneakers, maybe changing sneakers if they're not already wearing them. Drills will be similar to what we've already talked about, bathroom as well. And just to speak a moment to lunch and recess at the secondary levels. Lunch, we have swapped all the lunch tables out and taken desks that used to be in classrooms. Since we needed more space in the classrooms, we took those desks and put them into the cafeteria. So those in the cafeteria spaces, you will now see individual student desks spaced 6 feet apart. In the cafeteria is where students will be allowed to take their masks off as they sit at their desks to eat their lunch. So we needed those to be a full 6 feet apart. So they will be able to do that. They will have their barriers as an extra layer of protection. And as we said earlier, they will have tent space and outdoor space that they can also expand into for a mask break, to eat out in fresh air, and to have the opportunity to do that during lunch. At the high school level, we are expanding open campus privileges with parent permission only, but expanding that to 9th through 12th grade, again, so we can reduce the density of students that are in the cafeterias and better be able to accommodate them with the appropriate spacing so that they can safely eat at a socially distanced distance. We're also hoping then as well for the middle school, our middle schoolers do still have a recess period, usually combined with lunch. We're going to split them ideally into 2 groups, similar to the way the elementary handles it, where half the group will go to lunch first while the other half goes outside for recess, and then they would swap. So again, reducing the density so we can better able to socially distance, and then all students will have those chances for mask breaks. We again will allow students during recess to have masks off as long as they are in assigned groups and as long as they are spaced to the greatest degree possible and moving outside. Really same procedures here as we talked about at the elementary, so I'm not going to go through those again. And I think we have hit many of these, a couple others. No, actually we didn't. There's some new ones here. So visitors are going to be very limited. They will only be allowed for district business. So if your child forgets something, you can drop it off at the building, but you will not be able to come in. That is, again, to minimize the people that are coming into the environment. Any visitors who are permitted in will still have to go through temperature checks, health attestations, hand sanitizers, and instructions for any of the health protocols that are in place for all students and all staff. We are in the process of hiring some building substitutes to help with coverage. We don't normally have standing kind of permanent subs, but given the nature of this year, we recognize we're going to need some more hands on deck that know the procedures. So we're securing additional substitutes to be more on staff in the year to come. Breakfast and lunch is going to continue to be available in the schools as it normally is, recognizing we do have students that are on free and reduced lunch, and also recognizing that the economy has left many families in greater need than ever before. So the same way that we had lunch and breakfast available for students through the spring, any student who was in need, we'll continue to make that available throughout the fall as well. And each principal will have a schedule and a location established for that for anyone who needs to come in and pick that up. Whether it's an in-person day for that student or whether it's a remote day, it will still be available. We've touched on Chromebooks and internet. Teacher training, that was a question that actually came up a lot in the pre-submitted questions. So just to give you some samples of titles that our teachers have been training on. And I should say, this has been over the summer, we offer professional development. It is basically choice-based. Teachers are not required to be there, but we were so incredibly pleased to see a great offering of courses and for them to be fully subscribed, to the point we had to add additional sessions, and we're going to be adding some of these titles again to our superintendent's conference days. So there was training conducted in areas such as creating more interactive presentations, how to foster student engagement in virtual learning environments, classroom management and learning environment in virtual learnings. Things like Teachers College reading and writing in a virtual environment, collaboration, assessment, how to continue to use phenomenon-based learning experiences in the science classroom. Let's see what else. Top tech tools, interactive presentations. I think I mentioned that one. As well, we are continuing to move forward with all elements of our strategic plan. So when we think about cultural competence, we also were able to offer sessions from Facing History in Ourselves organization and their professional development for our teachers. There was professional development on civics and civic engagement and fostering conversations around civics, and responsive and inclusive pedagogical approaches in the math and science classroom. So a variety of different trainings and to support the techniques for functioning in this area. We even did training on things like Pear Deck, Kami, News ELA, Flipgrid, Dreambox, and a variety of the new software systems and tools that our teachers are going to have available to them to help make the learning more engaging, responsive for our teachers, for our students, and more effective and efficient for our teachers to manage. We are a couple more items here, and then I think we're close to the end. We certainly have procured additional PPE for some job-specific needs, things like clear fronts on masks for speech teachers, for reading teachers, people who may need to have that visual but still want to maintain face covering. We'll have face shields available for teachers upon request, goggles if needed. Definitely for our nurses, increased levels. We'll have N95s, gowns, face shields, goggles, et cetera, to make sure that anyone with those type of close support needs has what they need to be safe from the student side as well as the adult side. And then I'm going to turn over to Julia just to speak briefly about our training that we're doing on trauma-informed practices, as well as our continued work on responsive classroom at the elementary level and the expansion of universal dialectical behavior therapy at the secondary level.
Sure, thank you. So one of the things that we've been talking about the most is really coming back in September for kids and also adults. Just the way we left in March is that everything was normal. And now in September, when we come back, desks are going to be apart. You're not going to see your teacher's face. Everyone's going to be wearing masks. It's going to be a completely different setting. It's not the school that they left behind. And so we are very much aware of the traumatic experience that students and teachers are going to experience. And so over the summer, for the past several weeks, we had several meetings with the psychologists, K-5 and 6-12 separately, psychologists and principals, because again, it is, developmentally, we got to really think about what their needs are. So just to give you a couple examples of what the elementary psychologists have done is they created some videos and resources for parents that they're going to be sharing with parents before school starts, just on things like how do we help children cope with stress, and what do typical stress responses look like in children? What do we do about separation anxiety, transitioning back to school in such a different setting? The other part, so that would be like the home part. And then for us, one of the things that we talked about is how do we have these little ones come to school and see their teacher for the first time with a mask on. So we're thinking about on one of the superintendent's conference days, have like a Google Meet opportunity where they can actually see the teacher. And there is so much that you could read from a facial expression without the mask. And that's how you get to know someone. And so we wanted to provide that opportunity, even if it's brief, even if it's half an hour, to be able to see the teacher, see each other, the rest of the class. So those are some of the things that we're planning, just so that we have some things in place to make that transition a little bit easier. We've also at K-12, the nurses have made videos on the 4 different hygiene things. So what is the best way of washing your hands? How do you sneeze into your elbow? How do you put a mask on? So we also prepared those as well that we're going to be sharing with the family. So we're putting a lot of things into place so that we can help the students transition in, because we realize that unless you are feeling comfortable when you walk in, learning is not going to take place. So the first days will really be focused on community building and really getting to know each other and getting to know the teacher. Going back to Dr. Champ's Dr. Champ's PowerPoint. Sorry, it's 5:30. I apologize. I'm looking at trauma. So the trauma-informed training, our psychologists will be doing, will be presenting to the faculty as well, because we want to make sure that they are aware of some of the different behaviors that they might be seeing when school starts. And so we'll be doing that during one of the superintendent's conference days. Actually, that's going to be on day 1, because our day 1, we really want to focus on the physical and the health and safety, and also social emotional health for everyone, for students and kids. So that's kind of the training that we're focusing on. Responsive classroom is something we've been focusing on since last year at the K-5 level. We're doing the second cohort training the following on August 31st and September 1st. At the secondary level, we have decided to expand our DBT. What DBT does is it really focuses on teaching very specific skills. And DBT really right now we used for our TSP program, our therapeutic program, but we're expanding that to tier 3 support, as well as tier 1, which would be universal. So it is for any student who really requires some strategies on how to really make the right decisions, how do you cope with stress and things like that. So interpersonal skills, all of those are the different strategies that we're hoping to start teaching our students very specifically by our teachers. So that's something that we're looking forward to doing this year.
Okay, and I think this brings us to our last slide, which is one of the biggest questions. And I think this question has been answered, but there's still definitely some questions around it. Hopefully everyone saw yesterday, we did put out an email asking folks who are interested in the full virtual option, giving them the opportunity to select that. So for those who we'd asked last week, students that have themselves had health issues or lived with someone who had health issues, to sign up if they felt that if they were going to not be able to come to school as a result. That helps us to know who may need additional support from us in learning remotely for the long term. But now again, we've opened the option up using the hybrid model. We've opened the option for anyone who chooses to stay home remote 100% of the time. So that survey went out yesterday. We do ask that you that you do your best to make that decision and submit by next week, so that we can use it for planning purposes. We are asking that folks commit to a marking period or a trimester, depending on your level. And again, that's for planning purposes. We do recognize it may be hard to make that commitment. We're asking you to make that commitment to the best degree that you can. And if something changes, that's a conversation you can have with your principal. It will be based on the hybrid model. And again, it's that similar description to what we've talked about, where students will have access to the daily Google Classroom lessons. They'll have access to the live stream of the teacher teaching, and they'll have access to an academy period for support. Certainly, you can email the teacher at any point in time, and the teachers, as they did through the spring, I'm sure will connect and provide that one-on-one support as needed for students. There will be a daily attendance requirement for all students, and I say this because I know we've gotten a variety of questions about people wanting to only access the live portion or only access different portions of it. We're required to take attendance and to report that to the state. So we will be taking attendance daily of all students who are in person and or who are fully remote for the day. We're required to do that, and so we are requiring that of students. You know, we can't control everything that everyone does outside of school, but what I can say is we will be taking attendance every day and expecting students to report for attendance every day. Students may need to come in person for assessments. Our teams were meeting just this week, so we don't have an answer to this yet. And we will have that answer as the beginning of school comes closer. And that's things like benchmark assessments, quizzes, tests, grading. We may need students to come in person to take those to assure some testing integrity or just the process of the test. But again, more information will come out about that. We want students to be able to stay connected to the teacher, which is why we've got the daily check-in period. And then again, any changes in process or in approach just need to be, there needs to be a conversation with the principal. There have been questions about people wanting, you know, can I move in or out of this model? Again, we're asking people to commit, but we understand the flexibility may be needed. And that's a conversation to have with your principal along the way so that we can understand what flexibilities are needed for you. One of the questions that we've gotten a lot around this, especially at the elementary level, is if enough students opt out or opt for full virtual, can't we repurpose that teacher to set up a full virtual class? And the answer to that really is a complicated one because we need to have, as a district, we need to have a class for every student, whether they choose the remote option, whether they're doing the hybrid option. So if we were in a position where enough students opted out that we could potentially reduce a section at the elementary instead of having 3 sections at a grade level, maybe go to 2 classes at a grade level, and then take that third teacher and set up a fully virtual classroom, that it really does sound better. It sounds like a great approach. The problem is if anyone in that class then decides that the virtual is not working for them, there's no class for them to go back to. Or if we got to a point in the year where we were ready to return to full instruction, that class is now made up of students from 4 different elementary schools. Which class do they go back to? Do they go back as a combined 4 school class in one building? Do they disperse into the other classes? And then we then have to disband existing classes in other buildings to now recreate balanced classes at the grade level within a particular school. There's a lot of complications around that if we were to take somebody out of the mix. That being said, we are asking people to commit to for a length of time so that we can see what those numbers look like, what those commitments look like, to see if it does present additional opportunities. At this point, we're not able to accommodate requests for students to come in every day. If we're not able to necessarily commit to having a separate full virtual class because of these complications. I'm not saying those things are out of the cards, but with the information we have right now, we're not able to make those commitments. So if anyone is contemplating the fully remote option, it is fully remote based on the hybrid model as we stand today. So we'll continue to monitor, we'll continue to see what opportunities arise through that. But that is the opportunity that parents have in front of them at this point in time. That does bring us to the end of our presentation. I am aware that we're already at a little over an hour and a half. So I want to escape out of this for a moment and just double check the questions that were sent in advance to see if I missed anything that I might want to touch on very quickly. And we're okay to stay till 6. If folks can hang around that time, we may be able to take some chat questions as well. So we'll just quickly skim through the list here for a moment. How do we deregister an incoming kindergartner? You would contact our district registrar, Charisse DiDonato, at the district offices, and she can assist you with that. Talk about that. We went through the procedures. That. The recordings from earlier in the day, yes, those will be posted to the website. This morning's was recorded. This evening's will be recorded. Alex Wolf, our public information officer, is on the line. Alex, where will those meetings be posted on the website?
So they'll be available under the news and information section of the homepage, and as well on the reopening page that's part of each of both the district site and all 6 school sites. And we'll try and share those links out in different ways as well.
Thank you. Question: during the spring, there was no evidence of differentiated instruction for different learners. How will this be addressed in the fall? So especially thinking of the elementary level, we now have these 2-hour instructional blocks in the morning and the afternoon. That is specifically to allow teachers to differentiate for the needs of the students in their classes. So there should definitely be a different level of differentiation, and the teachers are developing more of their own materials. I would say continue to reach out to your teachers if you need additional support. Your child's a special education student and they need additional support or differentiation, reach out to their case manager. And certainly principals are also available as a resource, and curriculum directors should you have concerns around differentiation, and as well as supports, whether it's RTI or multi-tiered systems of supports. That's our updated approach to response to intervention. You can reach out to all those folks for additional support should your child need. I think we've addressed most of the other ones that were sent in advance in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to ask Alex. I'm hoping that you were able to watch the chat a little bit as we went through to see if there are some questions that we could highlight from the chat.
Sure. So I'm going to start at the top and I'll try and make my way through for as much time as we have. One question that came in: if a teacher is using one of the tents, will the camera also go out to the tent?
John Sabalos, I think, may still be on the call. He's our director of technology. At the moment, we do not have wireless outside. John, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, correct. Right now, we don't anticipate using. We don't have any wireless access points outside of the schools. The infrastructure wasn't set up that way. It's something we are currently exploring, but as of right now, we do not currently have set up.
Okay. I see a question. Can you send in notice that you don't want your child on playground equipment? I would just say speak to your teacher and your building principal. There's usually monitors out monitoring recess. So I think that it would be key that the principal and teacher are aware of that, so that information can be passed along to the appropriate people. Will we conduct random testing? Again, as I said earlier, we don't have capacity for testing internally at the moment. Certainly, I know that there's a push in that direction, and once our country gets caught up with timely testing, I would imagine that there would be some definite progress in that area. There's a question for families with multiple young children. What's the expectation of parent participation on home days? That's a tough one. I think that's what we struggled with in the spring, and that's something that we're going to continue, unfortunately, to struggle with should we be virtual or hybrid throughout this year, especially with multiple children. The hope was that by having a more of a structured schedule, having the access to view what's going on in the classroom would help by way of the teacher being able to provide that direct instruction differently than what we did in the fall. We know the burden of that fell on the parents, in addition to managing the device, managing the handouts, managing the links. We're hoping that we've reduced some of those on that management side, and by having the teacher there to provide the direct instruction, we'll get the students started off in a much better way. But I think the reality is, with younger children, this is still going to continue to be a challenge that we're all going to have to work together on. Question: has the district made the final determination to open with a hybrid model? It's a tough question, again, because things continue to change. At the moment, we are Finalizing plans to be ready to open hybrid. Things could change between now and then. If they do change, we will certainly tell people as quickly as we are able to. At this point, we're continuing to plan as if we were opening in a hybrid, but still remaining open to that, the other possibilities of shifting to full virtual. And again, that could depend on the region, it could depend on local conditions, but we're continuing to move forward to plan so that we're ready in either scenario. Question, why, and I don't think I directly hit this question earlier, so I'll mention it. Why can't the kids at home directly interact with the class? The big challenge really in this environment is that it is in the full virtual, it's much easier to do that because it is the class, they're focused on the class, on the screen, they're all there. That definitely should be a high interaction environment. The hybrid model almost brings together, it just brings elements that make it incredibly complicated. It's very impractical for a teacher to be able to focus on the children in front of them and to focus on the children at home. It's not like we're in virtual meetings where there's adults on the other side or even college age students on the other side of the screen that are able to self-monitor and to really navigate the environment. So the teacher has to keep unfortunately, their priority on the students in front of them, managing the class there. As I said earlier, without this live stream, we would be looking at a model where the students would have the 2 days a week in person, and then they would be fully on their own doing asynchronous work on the home days. So bringing in this live stream was meant as a supplement to that. So we recognize the limits of it not being interactive. And you may see as teachers become more comfortable with this, that there does become more of an interactive process, especially those who are able to pick up some of the interactive skills more quickly. And there will be some level of that, and that hopefully will grow over time. But just as a baseline, we wanted to be clear and transparent about the fact that it is this live stream as the baseline, with the hope of there being more down the road. But that it's meant to kind of add something that wouldn't have been there had we not had the cameras in the classroom. We'll be sending textbooks and materials home for virtual students. The teachers are working to try to make sure whatever resources need to be home, more by way of manipulatives and supplies, will be home to the greatest degree possible. They are having conversations about whether to send like the pages of the workbooks and things like that home as well. So as we get closer to the actual nuts and bolts of school starting, they should get more clarity on those type questions. How does the virtual option meet the social emotional needs of a child that's solely virtual? That's going to be a continued challenge. I think we all recognize virtual teaching and learning was never meant to be this in this environment, especially for our youngest learners. So some of the steps that Julia mentioned at the beginning about taking efforts to establish those first relationships without the mask, kindergartners coming in and meeting their teachers, walking the environment, even if they choose 100% virtual kindergarten, it would be great to still make that first in-person connection. Doing the virtual morning meetings. We have a second cohort of teachers being trained on on responsive classroom this year, and morning meeting is the heart of that. So we should have about 50%, approaching 2/3 of teachers formally trained. Having that morning meeting with the full class and being interactive in that sense every day does try to help to attend to those needs a little bit better. And again, that's where we're going to be looking throughout the year. And I think Julia may have mentioned it. We do plan to send out surveys and gather feedback throughout the year, at least quarterly, maybe more frequently than that, to try to find out what is working and what is not, and what are the gaps that we need to start filling in. And especially as I think that we will see needs in that area. Our school psychologists are going to continue to be available for students who are at home as well as students who are in school as well. And they can be reached via email and phone. Julia, I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to add on that question.
Yeah, you're right. I actually forgot to mention in this meeting that the principals will be sending a survey home in the next few days, in the next couple of weeks, actually, just to gather some information in terms of the past, I guess, 4 or 5 months for the kids, just in terms of, if the student has suffered any sort of loss, have experienced any sort of traumatic event, because we do want to make sure that when the kids are coming back, we have the staff, we have the clinicians on campus. We want to be able to address them. We want to be able to, if we need to run a group, a specific group for maybe a loss of like a family member, we can certainly do that, but we have to know what's been going on. So we're going to be asking for that information. It's going to be the principals are going to send it out so that only the principal receives that information from you, and the principal will share with the building PPS staff. So that's the other data that we're going to be collecting, just so we can support individual students.
Question about, since students have to carry their bags around, we'll be investing in more digital resources. There's definitely been more of an investment in digital resources. We're also going to be asking teachers to minimize the supply requirements, especially at the secondary level, as students are going to be carrying backpacks around, and we don't want them overly weighed down with those books. So definitely some attention to that, so that we can ease that burden. There's also a question about tents at Hutchinson. The tents for Hutchinson are going to be placed up at Julianne's playground, probably on 2 tents, one on either side of the net on one of the tennis courts. So we've got a nice flat area. It's not taking away play space, and the students will still have access to those throughout the day. And the classes can walk up there during the day, even if it's not recess time. Will classes be recorded? The classes are automatically archived and recorded. What we found in the spring was the most effective strategy. If a student missed something, or a parent had a question about something, reaching out to the teacher was actually the most effective way to fill that gap. So things are recorded, they are archived, because that's the way the system is set up. But we would encourage folks to work directly with your teachers, so that you probably much more quickly be able to do a quick reteach, answer some questions, and get them caught up, as opposed to watching recordings. Will there be additional sessions? Your principals will be holding sessions as the start of school approaches. And so for those looking for additional, more specific details about what the instruction is going to look like, whether it's remote or in person, that I think is where you're going to get the best answers, and more specific to grade level and specific to your school. So I would encourage you to watch for those notices from principals. Hutchinson, yes, students will still be going to Julianne's for recess. Do we have an idea of the percentage of parents that have already expressed interest to remain virtual? Not yet, haven't had a chance to look at the surveys. Our initial general survey before we were asking for actual commitments was at about 15% of parents saying they did not plan to send their children back. So now we're in the process of gathering information, and we should know hopefully by next week. We've asked for commitments by next week. The question about a way for a teacher's assistant or intern to help bridge the needs of a teacher to focus on particular children. Julia, I can't remember if you mentioned in this session, you may have, about co-teaching at the secondary and how teachers may work to support the needs of students in smaller groups.
Right, I think the co-teaching classes, I think definitely, because there are 2 teachers, they should be able to address the needs of hopefully both groups in the hybrid model. I don't know about being able to hire interns and TAs, additionally, TAs and interns for the other classrooms.
Right, no, yeah, we're not in a position to hire for that. We do have interns certainly in some of the classrooms, and that's exactly how we anticipate they might be used, with using breakout rooms and the teacher directing them in those. I earlier mentioned some permanent substitute teachers to help cover classes if a teacher's out. If they're not being used to cover classes, they also would likely be available then to assist as a second person. So again, building principals can use those additional personnel to support as needed. Another question about screen time. One of the things I should say, and I wish we had some of the elementary folks on to really address this, because they thought really deeply and hardly and talked a lot about it. The lessons are not going to be like this has been, 2 hours straight of somebody talking and you listening. They will really be designed to be mini lessons, short instructional periods, and then times for students to either, the younger students, maybe the teacher would put a timer on and instruct students to then go, move away and do some independent work. And then a timer will go off and students will come back to the screen. Or if they're an older student, they may be able to tell them, okay, here's the mini lesson, any questions? Okay, now we want everyone to, we're gonna give you some, 20 minutes to work independently on your narrative writing piece. I want everybody to come back on at 10 o'clock. So it's not going to be straight talk, listen, C-SPAN style. It will be mini lessons, guided instructions, and then a chance for students to move away and to work independently and then to come back. So it's supposed to replicate more of that type of an instructional setting as opposed to really a straight lecture talk, because that would not be tenable for anyone, nor would it be effective. Okay. So as far as and learning resources available to parents, John Sabalos, I'm going to maybe call on you a little bit for this too. I know that each student is assigned a Google Classroom. And I know that is the base learning management system where all the teachers' materials will be distributed to the students about their class.
Correct.
How do parents, if parents want to assist, how do parents access that so they can assist their child?
Yeah, so right now everything is and if you could see me okay, I'm actually on one of the web cameras that we're gonna have in the classrooms. So I'm coming to you from my house. But we're gonna have resources that are posted for the parents. We're gonna be updating that parent handbook. So that way you can access like all the different software that we're gonna be using and stuff like that. We'll be highlighting some of the different materials that teachers will be using throughout the year. I'll include a list of all of the software suite of what we use within Pelham in that handbook. But just know that everything is tied to the child's Google account. So as soon as a child signs in into the Launchpad, they'll be able to find the entire suite of stuff they're going to be using there. And we'll try to have some resources available for you to use so that way you can see how to use some of that stuff. We'll probably be asking some of the teachers, because they're the ones who are on the front lines using a lot of the software with your children, to possibly assist with some of that. But I'll be outlining some of that stuff for you as we get closer to the opening of school.
Great, thanks, John. And I did mention earlier, we do have a number of systems that are going to make things more interactive. Programs like Kami, News ELA, Flipgrid, Dreambox, Raz Kids, I believe, is still in the mix. So there will be interactive softwares available to help support the learning of students throughout this. So it's approaching the 6 o'clock hour, and we've got about an hour break before our last session tonight. I just want to thank the administrators who were able to join me to field questions today, and thank you parents for being here. Your partnership through this is what will get all of us through it. We appreciate you taking the time and continuing to support. And we just encourage you to please stay in touch. Please stay in touch with your teachers and with your school principals. And if we can be of any support at the district level to get you connected to the right people, please let us know that as well. We do look forward to what will be a unique year, no matter what it holds. But being all on the same team, all coming to this with the best of intentions to give our children the best that we can, we will get through this, and we will get through it together. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and be safe, take care, and we look forward to seeing you in September. Thank you.